in this lesson, we'll be learning about the quadratic formula, okay? So sometimes we want to know, well, where does the formula come from? Like, who made it up? Well, the reason that the quadratic formula was formed was for functions that would not factor, okay? So they used it by completing the square, and these are all the steps that they went through in order to actually derive the formula that we know as the quadratic formula, okay? So once they went through and did all of these, the formula that we now know here is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c over 2a. Okay, so this formula can be used for all types of things that we're not able to factor, and so we use the quadratic formula instead. Okay, we need to memorize this. Okay, so there's actually a video that I'm going to have you guys watch, and the song goes to the lyrics that are right here. Okay, so x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Okay, so we'll look at the tune and the lyrics to that. Okay, so let's try an example using this quadratic formula. Okay, so we only use the quadratic formula when there is a middle term. Oops, sorry. Okay, so the middle term, like the bx, when the standard form won't factor easily. Okay, if something factors, it's easier just to do it by factoring. If it won't factor, we're going to use this. And also when the middle term is odd, making the completing square strategy really difficult. Okay, so we're not able to factor, and we're also not able to complete the square. It's much more difficult. Or if there's also a leading coefficient like 2x squared or 3x squared. Okay, so this is kind of like our plan D strategy. We tried everything and it won't work, so we're going to use the quadratic formula. Okay, so I am going to write it over here so we can use it. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Okay, and this is equal to x. Okay, so we know that the letters here, we go A, B, C. Okay, so x squared, the coefficient is 1, so A is equal to 1. B, the coefficient is negative 3. B is equal to negative 3. And C is negative 6. Okay, so now we can just fill in what we know. Okay, so here x is equal to negative b. So negative 3 is 3 plus or minus the square root b squared negative 3 squared minus 4 times a times c. We can put these in parentheses to make it easier. Okay, over 2 times a. 2 times 1. Okay, so moving down. X is equal to 3 plus or minus. Negative 3 squared is 9. And then here I have negative 4 times 1, so negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 6 is positive 24. Over 2. Then I can simplify one more time. X is equal to 3 plus or minus the square root of 33 divided by 2. Okay? This is actually our answer. We can't reduce anything here. Okay, so it looks really messy. Okay, so again, this is why it's kind of like our last plan. This is a really hard trinomial to factor here, so we're using the quadratic formula. Okay, let's go ahead and try number 2. So whenever we're using quadratic formula, we want it to equal 0 first. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here is set my problem equal to 0. So if I subtract 7, becomes 0. Now I can label my terms. A is 2, B is 6, and C is negative 7. Okay? So x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c over 2a. Okay? Simplifying here, I get negative 6 plus or minus 6 squared is 36. And then negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. And negative 8 times negative 7 is 56 over 4. Okay? And again, last step. Negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 92 over 4. Okay, so here's where I need to simplify. Okay, 92. I can think of a perfect square that I can pull out of here. Okay, 4 times 23 is equal to 92. Okay, so I'm going to simplify this. Square root of 4 times square root of 23 is equal, 4 times 23 is equal to 92. So the square root of 4 then becomes 2. So I can simplify here. Let me pull it down a little bit. Okay, so now x is going to be equal to negative 6 plus or minus square root of 4, which is 2 square root of 23. Okay, you're always trying to simplify. I see again that I can simplify the whole numbers. Okay, so if you can do it to every term, you can. So if I see that the number 2, 4, and 6, I can divide them all by 2. So if you can do it to every term, then it's possible. So 2 divided by 2 just becomes 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2. And negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. So then here my final answer is going to be negative 3 plus or minus, don't need to write 1 because it's the same, square root of 23 over 2. Okay, this is in simplest form. Okay, so I'd like you to pause the video and try number 3 on your own. Okay, so the first step that you should have done was add the 6 onto the left to make it equal 0. So 3x squared plus 5x plus 6 is equal to 0. Okay, then we want to name A, B, and C. A is equal to 3, B is equal to 5, and C is equal to 6. Okay, so plugging in for the quadratic, negative B, negative 5 plus or minus the square root b squared. 5 times 5 is 25 minus 4 times a times c. 4 times 3 times 6 over 2a. 2 times 3 is 6. Okay? So now, negative 5 we're going to simplify. 25, and then 4 times 3 times 6 is 72, so minus 72. Oops, sorry. Shouldn't be underneath the x. Over 6. Okay? So now I need to do 25 minus 72. I'm just going to erase it and do it in the same spot. 25 minus 72 is negative 47. Okay? I cannot have a negative underneath the square root. It's not possible. Okay? So because we can never square something to be negative. So our answer here is no solution. Okay? So again, we want to try and memorize this quadratic formula, which is right here. All right, let's move on and see an application of how we might use this. Okay, so let's look at the first problem. Suppose a football player kicks a ball and gives it an initial velocity of 160 feet per second. The starting height of the football is 3 feet. Okay, so remember that we talked about this problem earlier where we said that V is going to be the velocity and C is going to be the starting height. So I can use this and fill in what I need. So h is equal to negative 16 t squared plus, I know that my velocity is 160 feet per second. So I'm going to fill in 160 for v. And then my starting height, I started at 3 feet. So plus 3. Because c here is my starting height. So I want to use this formula to see if nobody catches the football, about how long would it be in the air for, okay? So here I can use quadratic formula. I have my A term, which is negative 16, B is 160, and C is going to be 3. Okay, so let's go ahead and fill in negative B plus or minus the square root of b squared, 160 squared, minus 4 times a times c. And this is all going to be divided by 2 times a. Okay, now I need to go ahead and simplify. Negative 160 plus or minus 160 squared, 25,600, and then negative 4 times 16 times 3 is 192, divided by 2 times negative 16. Okay? And then continuing to simplify on, I have x is equal to negative 160 plus or minus the square root of 25,792 divided by negative 32. Okay, so in this case we are going to go ahead and take the square root because it doesn't matter if we have a decimal here, we want to know about how long. Okay, so if I take the square root of 25,792, I am going to get 160.6. Okay, so I just did this right here on my calculator. Okay, so now I have x is equal to negative 160, and I have two equations here. I have plus 160.6 over negative 32. And then my other equation is going to be negative 160 minus 160.6 over negative 32. Okay, remember, because it could be plus or minus. And then the last step here is to simplify. Okay, so in the first one to simplify, negative 160 plus 160.6 is going to be 0.6 over negative 32. Okay, again, you can use your calculators, and you're going to get negative 0.0187. Okay, and then, or we can have negative 160 minus 160, and we're going to get here negative 320.6 over negative 32. Okay, if we divide negative 320.6 divided by negative 32, we get 10.02. So let's think about which answers make sense, okay? So let's look back at the question. Use the formula to find that if no one catches the football, okay, how long is it going to be in the air, like before it drops back down? So this answer right here of a negative, it can't be in the air for negative seconds, so this wouldn't be possible, okay? But it could be in the air for 10.02 seconds. So in this case, we have our one answer here of 10.02, okay? These are just ors, like we're not really sure until we check it. Okay, so just to give you guys a visual of kind of like what this looks like, is that a football player kicks a ball. Okay, so here's the floor, and the starting height here is 3 feet high. Okay, from here to here. This is the height. Okay, then he kicks the ball, okay, 160 feet per second. So we want to know how long is it in the air before it comes down and hits the ground. Okay, so that's why we can again see that time has to be positive, and it's 10.02 seconds.